Hey there! Rapid games or online games are nowadays way more common than classical chess, but what I like about classical games is that we can get some very deep ideas that cannot be prepared in just a few minutes of thought. So today I wanted to show a brilliant game played by Armenian Grandmaster who now represents the US, Levon Aronian, playing against nothing more than former world champion Magnus Carlsen, arguably the best player ever. The game was played in 2017 at the Norway Chess Tournament in Stavanger, and Aronian not only won the game, but he also played this very brilliant game that, even though it was not a perfect game, it really shows his style playing very creative and dynamic chess. So the game started with the move d4, and after d5 and c4, we get a queen's gambit. Black has many options here. Carlsen decided to go for the Slav defense after c6. And here we get, after knight to f3 and knight to f6, a very common position. Here Aronian again played the very common knight to c3, and here Carlsen played the move e6. Taking on c4 is an option, just in case that you're not very familiar with this line. Here, even though black gains a pawn, now black has less control over the e4 square. In this particular position, white can go for the move a4. White also has other options, but a4 is the most common line, preventing b5. Now planning to go e4, and here the most common line is to go bishop to f5, and after e3, black gets the pawn back. This is a very common line as well. But the move e6 is very logical, just keeping a grip on the d5 pawn. And here we get what we call the semi-Slav defense. One minor drawback of this move is that now the bishop on c8 is locked in, and spoiler alert, this is going to be black's worst piece in the game. But normally black tries to develop that bishop by later on playing something like e5 or b6, planning to fianchetto the bishop. So this is just very common. Here, Levon played a fairly solid option. Even though we're gonna get a crazy game, Levon decided not to go for the sharpest option, which is going bishop to g5 in this position, where here we get a lot of theoretical positions. Here black normally takes on c4, or first plays the move h6. But e3 is perfectly logical. And here Carlsen played a somewhat uncommon move. Here the main move is going knight b to d7. Just want to mention that taking on c4 here is a bit hasty, because this would simply help white take on c4 and develop the bishop at once. So black normally waits for the bishop on f1 to move before taking on c4, if black wants to take on c4. But here Carlsen played the move a6, which is a common move in the Slav. And one idea is to play b5 after taking on c4. So for example, if here white decides to move the bishop to d3, black can take on c4 and then follow up with b5. So in the Slav we get some subtle maneuvers, but here Levon played another common idea, which is b3. Since the bishop cannot develop on this diagonal, now it will try to go to b2. But Carlsen's idea of delaying the development on the bishop on f8 is to develop the bishop to b4 in this position, pinning the knight, and now white has to go bishop to d2. So the bishop cannot go to b2, but it has to go to d2. So black is achieving something by going bishop to b4. And now after knight b to d7, bishop to d3, both sides castled. And here in this position, Magnus again didn't go for the main line, which is the move bishop to d6. This might not make a lot of sense to go to b4 and then d6, but the idea is that the bishop, after pinning the knight, brought white's bishop to d2, so now it can go back to d6. Black doesn't want to give this bishop for the knight. This bishop is a very strong piece, controlling the dark squares, so bishop to d6 is the main option. But queen to e7 is also a logical move, just developing the queen. And here Levon played a move I think that was part of his preparation, which is the move bishop to c2. Just a very subtle move. One idea might be to bring the queen to d3 if the bishop on d2 moves, preparing a battery with the queen and a bishop eyeing the h7 square. But another idea might be that whenever black plays e5, if black goes e4, this would not attack the bishop. Again, this is just subtle preparation by the world's best players. Just to show you one sample line, if black plays a move like a5 and rook to e1, after e5, in this position, white can definitely take on e5, but white has additional options like taking on d4, since after the move e4, this pawn will not attack a bishop on e3. So here Magnus played the move rook to d8, and now Levon decided to attack the bishop by going a3. And here black has two main options. Black generally doesn't want to give this very strong bishop for the knight. So one idea might be to go bishop to d6, which is a common idea that we saw. It was definitely an option. Maybe here white still has a slight advantage. Black has to solve this problem with the bishop on c8. But the big question is what would happen after bishop takes, because the bishop on a3 is being defended by the queen. And here Levon's idea was to go rook takes, just giving an exchange in addition to the pawn that was already sacrificed, and then follow up with the move c5. So white has sacrificed a lot of material, a rook and a pawn, but the main idea is that the queen is going to be misplaced on a3. So this is the general idea. But on the other hand, there's no forcing line, at least no easy forcing line to drop the queen. Otherwise, Magnus would have not gone for this line. Definitely not, because he's a super strong player who calculates very well. But one idea, which is also very strange to drop the queen, is to go knight to b1. So this is just a very strange way of dropping the queen. Knight to b1 and followed by queen to c1. For example, if I play any random move like h6, here after knight to b1, we see that the queen doesn't have a lot of squares. a5 is covered by the bishop. If the queen goes to b2 or a1, bishop to c3 will attack the queen. And after queen to a2 and queen to c1, white has ideas to drop the queen, for example, by going bishop to b4 and knight to c3. And there's even the idea to go knight to c3 even without bishop to c3. For example, if I play a random move like king to f8, after knight to c3, queen to a5 is the only square for the queen, but this is a typical idea that we'll see later in the game. Knight takes c5, there's a discover attack against the queen. Now white is winning more material, and the queen is still in this net where it cannot go back to its camp. So the queen is still very misplaced in this position. So this is the main problem with black's position. It is very hard to play because there's no concrete line to get the queen back to safety. So here Carlsen tried the move b6, which makes sense, trying to attack this very annoying pawn on c5. And here actually Levon could have tried to go for this line, knight to b1. And we would actually get very similar lines to the ones that I analyzed, while white is just chasing the queen and getting a very good position. So after queen to a2, the very hard move to see is queen to c1, and then just continue chasing the queen. White would get a very good position there. But Levon played a more human move. Instead of going backwards, he went forward and went b4. So again, trying to drop the queen in a different way. And if black takes on b4, again we get this typical idea, a discover attack on the queen. Now there's even ideas to go knight to e7 and then capture on c6. And more importantly, in these lines, the queen is not going back, so black is still having the same problems. That's why here Carlsen tried giving some material back, and this was actually a very good idea. So Carlsen played very well in this game. As we see, he just made one mistake in the end. So that's why this game was very good. Both players played very good chess here. Knight to e4 just gives material to avoid getting the queen trapped. But now white is only an exchange down, having a dominant position, there's pressure on c6, and now there's the additional idea to attack the king because black has given this knight on f6. And here Carlsen correctly tried to activate his pieces. Instead of defending the pawn, here something like bishop to b7, this bishop is just a very passive piece. White can continue queen to c2, putting pressure on h7, and this queen is still having a lot of trouble to get back. So rook to b8 makes more sense. Black wants to capture on c5 and activate the rook. And here Levon could have tried queen to c2 with the same idea, but he found another very nice sacrifice and he took on h7, even though this sacrifice is more common and these lines are going to be more forced. Because here after king takes and knight to g5, now white has the idea to bring the queen to h5 and attack the queen. And here king to g8 is the only logical move in the position. If the king goes to h8, queen to h5, just gives a check and develops the queens at once. If the king goes to h6, after knight takes h7, we get a fork and white is recovering all the material. Or if king to g6, this is a typical sacrifice. Here queen to g4 is a common follow-up, now planning to attack the king. And if black tries something like knight to f6, after queen to g3, we get the same idea to attack the king, plus there's pressure on the rook on b8. So king to g8 is pretty much forced. Queen to h5, again now white has to be very concrete. Now white is a rook down. And here white has the idea to chase the king by going queen takes. But on the other hand, this pawn f7 cannot be defended because if black goes something like rook to f8, after queen to h7 we get a checkmate. So here knight to f6 is the best reply, covering h7, and after queen takes and king to h8, queen to c7 is the idea. Now white is going to recover some material because there's an attack on the two rooks, plus knight to f7 is coming, and after bishop to d7, knight to f7, king to h7, knight takes. So here Levon recovered the rook and he's also 2 pawns ahead in material, so it seems like the game is over. But Magnus here had this very nice move, rook to c8. If Magnus saw this move rook to c8 in advance, which most likely he did, this is just impressive because now he's going to win this knight on d8. So here after queen takes and knight to d5, attacking the queen, black is going to win a piece, but here white gets 3 pawns for the piece. So after queen to a7 and rook takes, white gets 3 pawns for the piece, and additionally this king on h7 is definitely more exposed than white's king. After all these lines, the game is still very complicated. Maybe from a practical point of view, it looks easier to play as white, but objectively, the position is still balanced. So here, Levon played e4, and in this position, Magnus made a slight inaccuracy. He went queen to d3, just counter-attacking the bishop on d2. But as we'll see, Levon is going to get a very strong pass pawn after this idea. Here, Carlsen had to play knight to f6, trying to keep the position together. But after being attacked for so many moves, we cannot blame Carlsen for trying to play actively. Queen to d3 plans to counter-attack the bishop on d2, but after pawn takes and queen takes, queen to c7, we see how black's pieces are a bit loose. Queen to g5 is the only way to protect the rook. Otherwise, if the rook moves, the bishop on d7 would fall. And here Levon has two pleasant options, either to go d6 or to take on c6. And after bishop to c8, so Levon got another pawn. This position might objectively be holdable for black, but I think that it is just very hard to play. As we can see, this bishop is standing there very badly, doing nothing. And here Levon played the move h3 with the idea to activate the rook and not have a back rank checkmate. And here after queen to d5, rook to d1, defends the pawn, and here Magnus made a mistake in a very hard position. Here it was better to play rook to f8, but again it's difficult to play this position with this very passive bishop on c8. And we cannot blame Magnus for playing the move e5. Tactically, it makes sense at first sight because the pawn on d4 is pinned, so white cannot capture on e5 because the rook on d1 would fall. And it also tries to activate this bishop on c8. But the problem is that now after rook to d3, pawn takes, here Levon played the very strong queen to e7, and now white is combining this idea of attacking the king by going rook to g3 at the right time, plus pushing this very strong pass pawn on the c file. So here after bishop to f5, rook to g3, planning to give a checkmate on g7, bishop to g6. Now Levon found this very forcing way to win the game by going queen to h4, giving a check. In this position, Carlsen resigned. The queen cannot cover the check because the rook on d8 would fall. If black goes bishop to h5, white has rook to g5, attacking the queen and the bishop. And if the king goes back to g8, white would simply capture on g6. And now there's a simple idea to go c7 and rook to d6. So this was a very creative game. Whenever we have such games, we're going to see some mistakes, but these mistakes probably make the game even more exciting. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you want to improve at chess with a daily training plan, feel free to check my free course in the description. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.